Well, welcome. Tonight, we're going to talk about one of the most important positions, which is one of the most unknown positions in the Commonwealth. If you're tuning into the news, you're getting a bird's eye view at the Senate judicial level of what our guest goes through every day, 365 days a year. So let's start with an introduction.
Nice to be here, Al.
I always start every show when we talk about candidates. So, we look and we say, Jen Casey, Governor's Council. First question will be my last question. Jen, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Well, Al, I think based on my professional experience as an attorney in private practice for 20 years, practicing law, criminal law, civil law, special prosecutor for the district attorney's office, former selectman in my hometown of Oxford for 10 years, former police commissioner, I will tell you that I am the only member of the Governor's Council who vets judicial nominees on important issues that impact all of our communities, public safety, victims' rights, and working very hard, I am, to hold judges accountable in Massachusetts. As an elected official at the ripe old age of 23, to the Board of Selectmen, I can tell you that my main issue, my focus, and the people that I represent now on the Governor's Council has always been public safety. And all you need to do is pick up a newspaper or listen to the news to hear about some of the terrible decisions that some judges have made recently that have literally resulted in the loss of lives. Officer Gannon, Sergeant Chestnut, and in my own backyard, Officer Donald Tarantino, who was killed in Auburn when a criminal defendant with a rap sheet was left to walk out of the Worcester Central District Court with no bail being required. And Officer Tarantino was shot down and killed later that evening. So when you talk about those issues, life and death, public safety, and even on the civil side, when you talk about folks who are facing foreclosure or losing their homes, these are areas of law that I practice. I know it's all important to people. Probate and family law, divorce, custody. This is the stuff that's important when we're vetting nominees, and there's no more qualified candidate in this race than Jen Casey.
So now, I don't think people understand. I mean, we're seeing TV today, and you see the Senate hearings. I hope it's not a circus like that, but I don't think people understand what the Governor's Council is and does. Could you explain it to us?
I would be happy to. It's something that I've gone around my 65 city and town district and explained to folks time and time again, because I really believe that the Governor's Council is one of the most important constitutional officers here in the Commonwealth. We are a body of 8. We were created at the time that the Massachusetts Constitution was created in 1780. And I know I don't look a day over 200, but it's been around since the Mass Constitution was created by our founding fathers.
But now, let me just start. 200 years, and are you not the first woman to take this post?
I am the first woman to ever represent the good people of the 7th District, which is primarily all of central Massachusetts since 1780. That is a fact.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. And so what we do is the 8-member body, and if you envision the Commonwealth from east to west, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way out to the Berkshires and our state border, and we all represent our respective districts, 8 counselors. I have 65 cities and towns. We meet every Wednesday in the governor's office. We have our own chamber, and we vet judicial nominees and all lifetime appointed clerk magistrate positions, and with the final approval of all members of the Massachusetts Parole Board and all workers' comp judges. But the lifetime appointed judges are obviously, I would say, the most important job that we have to vet and to vote on lifetime appointed judges. Now, the governor nominates, but if a nominee does not make it through the Governor's Council, like the U.S. Senate, as you've alluded to, with a majority vote, they do not become a judge. So I like to describe the Governor's Council, we are the guardians at the gates of justice. And because we're directly elected by the people, we really are the people's voice in the judicial confirmation process. That's how I view my role.
So now, my understanding is we're watching TV, and the select group of senators are evaluating potential Justice Kavanaugh, and they will make a recommendation to the full Senate, and the full Senate will vote. So it starts with the president picking a candidate. The group, the nomination group, or the small group that we're watching on TV, vetting him essentially, and then making their pitch to the full Senate.
Right.
And if the full Senate says yay, that Kavanaugh is the Supreme Court Justice.
Right.
If they say nay, they start again. How does that work? So Charlie Baker comes up and says, I would like this person to be a judge.
Right. What happens is somebody would apply. There's a formal application process. They would apply and go through that process. I'm not going to explain the whole process, but if they make it to the council, if they make it through the process, then they would meet with the governor and lieutenant governor. If the governor decides to nominate, then it's a formal nomination, and we would get notice, and we would get a stack of each on each nominee about this thick, which has all the background information that we're hearing about in Judge Kavanaugh's hearing, personal, professional, writing samples. If they're an existing judge, we get previous cases. So we would get that type of information, and then we would schedule a judicial confirmation hearing, normally about a week or two after we get the packet, unless in the instance of a Massachusetts Supreme Court nominee, which is obviously the highest court in our state. Generally, we'd give probably about a month so all the councils can do their due diligence, and then we would schedule the hearing. And we've actually just had 5 nominees go up to the Massachusetts Supreme Court under the Baker administration, and some of those hearings have lasted as long as 3.5 days, where we've gone 8 hours, another 8 hours, another 8 hours.
But that's your group.
That
Your
is my
group of 8.
Yes, and we don't have to, it's just us who vote. So we're slightly different than the United States Senate in that Judiciary Committee is basically the governor's council. We vote, that's it. We don't recommend to a higher body.
I'm saying,
anymore.
at the end of the day, now is it dangerous to have 8?
Well, here's what happens. Good question. There's a provision in the Massachusetts Constitution where if there is a 4-4 tie, which happened a number of times under the Patrick administration, then the governor has to physically come into the room, and the lieutenant governor presides over our assemblies, which we have. So we'll have a hearing, and then we have weekly assemblies where the lieutenant governor presides. And so the governor comes into the room, the lieutenant governor passes a gavel to the governor, and then the lieutenant governor becomes a voting member of the governor's council.
So Karen would cast the...
break the tie, or previously under the prior administration, Tim Murray. A little side note about that, under the Patrick administration, they became very frustrated that there had been a lot of ties. And I'll tell you that before I took my seat in January of 2011, there hadn't been a single judicial nominee defeated in hundreds of nominees under the Patrick administration. You cannot tell me that every single person who's nominated is qualified to sit in a lifetime position. So what started happening was we started to have a lot of 4-4 ties, and Governor Patrick became frustrated that he had to be present when he wanted to be elsewhere campaigning for the president. So there was an attempt by the Patrick administration to request an advisory opinion from the Massachusetts Supreme Court to basically say that the governor did not have to be present to break a tie, which would have really changed the interpretation of the Mass Constitution, which sets this process up. So I went to the administration. I said, you need to give us funding, or I'm going to go to the press about this. You can't just go in there to the SJC and try to circumvent this process. It's not fair to the people. So we were able to solicit funds to retain counsel, to represent the governor's council, to oppose the Patrick administration's attempt to basically change the Mass Constitution. I don't know why, but my colleagues nominated me, the freshman counselor at the time, to go find an attorney. And I found a retired Massachusetts Appeals Court judge who agreed to take our case. And we were successful in blocking the Patrick administration from the Mass Supreme Court saying that he didn't have to appear, even though it was interesting because some of the nominees had been put on the Mass Supreme Court by Deval Patrick, and they ruled against him, which I thought was an important win that the public had never heard about, but just to maintain the integrity of the process as set forth in our Constitution.
Now, am I naive when I think that, when we elect a president, one of the things in the back of my mind is he or she could influence the interpretation of our laws for decades. But even on a local level, the governor is nominating judges, and you're saying, what's the average tenure? 10, 15 years?
Yeah, it could be as high as 25. If you have somebody go on the bench in their early 40s or mid 40s, mandatory retirement age in Massachusetts is 70 years old for a judge. And, that's one of the things that I tell people. And, I've had occasion to be at events when the governor has been at events and we speak, and I inform the public that, look, you might like Governor Baker's tax policies, you might not, you might like who he's putting on an education board, or some of his other initiatives, but the longest and greatest legacy that a governor leaves on his or her people is who they
appoint as judges,
who they nominate to be lifetime appointed judges in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Unquestionable.
So, I guess I just find it hard that if I'm trying to establish my legacy as governor, and I know that, okay, maybe I can last 4 years, 8 years, whatever it is, 9 years, nobody's going to last 25 years as governor that I can remember.
No, we don't have term limits in Massachusetts, which is, I don't know if people know that.
But when was the last time you saw a governor for 2 decades?
No, right, no.
Right?
Usually 2 terms. And
2 terms, maybe 3.
Right.
But if I appoint these judges who think like I do, I'm buying onto 2 decades of influence.
You are. And in this case, in our state, Governor Baker has nominated and had confirmed 5 members of the 7-member Massachusetts Supreme Court. Can you imagine a governor getting 5 out of 7 people?
No, you've totally reshaped. He's totally reshaped the whole court.
That's right. And as the Supreme Court does have the power to really make laws and change laws, they can say this law is unconstitutional, or this law, remand cases and say, fix, or send them to the legislature.
Because you say they have the power to make laws. Technically, no, but yes.
Correct. If they, and that's a big pet peeve of mine. I am a vocal opponent of judicial activism, and what that means is we all need to stay in our lane. You have the executive, judiciary, and legislature, and we're all separate but co-equal branches. The judiciary shouldn't be acting like the legislature, and the legislature needs to honor when the SJC and the Supreme Court says this is not constitutional, fix it. So that's what I mean when I say that they can't make laws, but they can certainly shoot down laws, and they cause the legislature to change laws.
We've said that about the FDA. The FDA cannot make laws. When you look at the Code of Federal Regulations, that lays down the law. But when they say, we don't like this, or everybody falls in the line. If the Supreme Court of Massachusetts takes a strong position, who's going to fight them?
Right. A millionaire, maybe, somebody with incredible resources to take it up to a federal appeals court. We actually did have a case on a Second Amendment issue. It was called the Catano case. It was better known as the stun gun case, and it was about a woman who had been physically abused by her boyfriend, lots of domestic violence, serious injuries, physical injuries. So she went out and got herself a stun gun, right, non-lethal. And what happened was she had some interaction with the police, and they found this weapon. Well, they charged her with having that, and they took it away, and she appealed it and basically said, that's my Second Amendment right to have that, like that's protected under the Second Amendment. Well, the case went to our Massachusetts Supreme Court, and they handled it miserably, and Judge Gantz, who's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, wrote the decision, and it went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and it was unanimous. Obama's nominees, George Bush's nominees, all said, you got this so wrong, that this woman, of course it's protected under the Second Amendment, it's not a lethal gun. And the Massachusetts Supreme Court said, well, because it wasn't a gun that existed back in the time that the Constitution was passed, then it's not protected. And it went up to, as I said, the United States Supreme Court, and they really ripped our court. And the decision was, quite frankly, embarrassing to read. And so you asked me who can fight the Mass Supreme Court takes a lot of
U.S.
money.
Supreme, yeah.
You gotta take it all the way up, but can you imagine the resources and the time and the money?
I mean,
it's very unusual.
How many people, you represent 35 towns.
65.
65. So maybe there's 130 people that could do that.
Could do that, right. I mean, it's very unusual that somebody would have those resources. So, when you say it, really, if the Mass Supreme Court says something, that's usually going to stick unless there's some extraordinary resources or, push to take it to a higher
That's
court.
a pretty big swath. If you think there's 300 odd towns and cities in Massachusetts, and you've got 65 of them?
Yes, I have 5 counties. So if you imagine my district is a big square, if you will, I have parts of Hampden and Hampshire, Ware, Palmer, Warren, Holland, and then I go all the way up to Athol. Then I go over to Townsend and Ashby, which is Middlesex, down to Bellingham, which is Norfolk, and all of Worcester County. I have Hampden, Hampshire, Norfolk, Middlesex, and Worcester County is part of my district. So
is this done by population, like the census?
it is. I mean, that's what they try to do. That's what they try to do. But you can imagine my district is different than the population in more of the
How do
cities.
you even contact people across 65 towns? I have a hard enough time keeping track of people in Milford.
Well, you're working in between a full-time law practice, a 5-year-old, your duties on the Governor's Council, and you just go 100 miles an hour. I love it. I love meeting people. I could be down in Milford at the Portuguese Festival or at the Italian Club at a Mickey Ward bike run, and then the same day be up in Bolton at a fair, or up north at Clinton event in Clinton, or up in Gardner at the Trail
You have to do this and keep a full-time job?
Well, this is a part-time job, the Governor's Council. I choose to. It's just my speed. But I love what I do. The law is so fascinating. I love to be in court. Any given day I could be in Milford District Court in the morning, Worcester Probate and Family Court in the afternoon, and at the Worcester Registry of Deeds like I was today doing real estate closing. But I think honestly, to vet judges, you really need to be in the trenches. You really need to understand the criminal justice system if you're going to do it the right way. You can be naive and ask softball questions about things you really don't know about. But when you've done bail hearings as a special prosecutor and a criminal defense lawyer like I have, I know what to ask when it comes to public safety issues. When you've been to the jails and you see what goes on in the jails and you've visited clients there, you really have a bird's eye view. When you've represented families who have had some tragic, not necessarily criminal, but some civil event, they lost their house or they have a major lawsuit, so one of their children were injured. When you're in Superior Court and you're arguing a summary judgment motion, whether a case is going to survive. I represented a family. The mother was killed at a terrible intersection where somebody had been killed a few years prior, same exact accident, same exact injury, and the state never fixed the highway. And you're trying to survive a summary judgment just to give this family their day in court. I've done all that. So I'll ask a Superior Court nominee, what is your philosophy about giving a family like that their day in court? If there are facts disputed, because a summary judgment can kick a case out before it goes to trial, and a lot of insurance companies like to use that mechanism to get out of cases. So I want to know if a judge is going to give a family like that their day in court. So all that goes into...
I'm a chemist. I run for the Governor's Council. People like me. How would I know even what to do? I mean, I can understand you're living it. So you feel the frustration or the exuberation when things go well. But when you see things that don't work, you're getting it first time. As a chemist, how would I even know how to vet a judge?
Well, that's kind of my point, is that you may be a very brilliant man in a different venue, but you don't want to go to a podiatrist if you need open heart surgery.
Right.
So, I really do think that it is uniquely a position that is filled best by somebody who does it for a living. And I think really the multi-faceted type law that I do, there's really not been a nominee that's come before us that I haven't had some experience in that area of law. And if I don't know, I know enough to read cases and study statutes and educate myself to be an effective member of the council.
So how many judges are there in Massachusetts?
Over 300. And it's a moving target because sometimes you have retirements and they don't fill the slots, but there are statutory caps for each probate and family, superior court. Obviously, there's 7
But 300, how many turn a year?
That depends. Through attrition, retirements.
Whatever out of 300, is it 30 a year?
Let me give you this as a benchmark. So the Baker administration, who's just coming up on their 4th year, recently celebrated their 100th nominee to the courts, whether it's the Supreme Court, District Court, probate, housing, juvenile.
100 out of 300?
100, yeah. A lot of retirements, because some of these people have been on for a long time, and we're anticipating more because the judges just got a pay raise. It came in 3 segments, and the most recent was July 1 of this year, the final pay raise. So
I guess what's confusing is, okay, if the average judge lasts 15 years, how come 1/3 of them are turning every year? Is this an anomaly, or?
No, I don't think so. No, but don't forget, no, not every year. 100 over 4 years.
So, okay, so I said 30, you're
Yeah.
saying 25 a
Yeah,
year. That makes more sense.
Yes, yeah, so over there 4 years, it's been about 100.
Okay, that makes more sense. So it's about 10%, 8%. So now I start out, I want to be a judge.
Okay.
I go get my forms, I go through the process. So Charlie Baker says, yes, you could be a good judge. Does he get to pick where, or does he just say you could be a good judge?
Well, it depends. So some positions are called circuit positions, so you could be nominated for a circuit position, and let's say you live in Milford, let's just say district court, nominated for a district court position, and it's a circuit position. So you live in Milford, there's a very good chance that for the first 6 months you'll be sent all over the Commonwealth to you to get your sea legs, but then, just as a matter of practical application, and you know your community, and district courts really are community courts, there probably would be an attempt or an effort to bring you back closer to where you live, if possible. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but that's usually what happens. People tend to apply for positions. There are some positions that are just Milford District Court. It's a Milford position. People tend to apply for those, but if you're going to apply for a judgeship, you don't want to be too picky. If you can get a circuit spot, you're going to get a circuit spot. It's really a great job. It's an awesome responsibility. And judges, I say.
But the governor will pick somebody and say, Jen, I would like Joe to be Milford, or would he say, I'd like him to be a circuit judge? And
you would apply. So you would apply. So in other words, there are postings. If a slot is open, Milford District Court, you would apply, and then you would be a Milford judge. You wouldn't be a circuit. If there's a circuit, you would apply, and they'd say, we have a shortage in Essex County, so we're going to send you out that way, or wherever they would need you. And that would be up to the Chief Justice of the District Court, who is Paul Dawley, who was just reappointed to a 5-year term. He's kind of the boss of all the District Court judges, and he fills the slots where they're needed.
But now, okay, I've got Joe and Sally, both equal, and I pick Sally. Do I turn around and say, well, hey, we had an opening out in Western Mass. Joe might be a great candidate. Would you go back to the governor and say, how come you're not a...
The governor could, that person would be, so if they make it through the process, they are viable for 18 months.
Okay.
So if Sally didn't get it the first time and she's kind of in the pool, the governor could say, I want to give it to her this time because I only had 1 slot at the time, but now I have another
Now
one.
somebody else
Yes.
retired. You go, oh, okay.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned you get a stack.
Yes.
I mean, we're hearing about Judge Kavanaugh having 6 background checks by the FBI.
Our state police do our background
I was going to
checks.
say, who do you use?
State police.
What do they actually do? Is that something you can explain? Or?
Well, yeah, they'll look. Well, obviously, the first thing that they'll do is pull somebody's carry. They're in check with the Criminal History Systems Board if there's been any type of criminal activity, and then if there's any, if there's anybody in the application that there's ever been a BBO complaint against a lawyer, Board of Bar Overseers, they might reach out to that person and say, how was your case resolved? Because there's got to be disclosures in the application. If there's been any situations of domestic abuse that has been brought to the state police attention, either through the application itself or somebody reaching out. Because once somebody's nominated, there is a public announcement, usually a press release, it's posted on the governor's website, so the public is informed. So, anything can be brought to the state police attention. And so they'll just do,
So you'll put up that Joe or Sally are being nominated for the Milford District Court, so that
Yes.
everybody knows, and if anybody has an opinion, they can send it in.
yeah, I feel bad. We keep talking about the Milford District Court. I know Judge Calgione isn't going
Well, no,
anywhere
no, no.
anytime soon. He's a great judge.
but
I
we-
saw him today
Let's
in
face it,
Clinton.
we had Frank Larkin, who we all,
Right, right.
Francis
right.
and Virginia were mainstays. They still are the community. Good Holy Cross boy. I see him up at the games. And he was there forever. We never thought.
Right, yeah.
Now you get Judge Calagione, and you sit there and say, okay, so now we're assuming he'll never age out.
Right, right.
But, it doesn't matter what court, what district court. So they go around and they start asking people, or is it
They
an
could.
active search or is it a passive search?
Active as far as the state police investigation?
State police, do they just get on the computers and take stuff
I
in?
think
or-
so, and if there's any leads that come in, I mean, they don't go out and try to assassinate somebody's character by any means, they're just going to do their due diligence. Like I said, check the criminal history, any lawsuits filed against anybody that they didn't disclose, BBO complaints, domestics, any of that kind of stuff. So they do a pretty thorough job. I mean, I don't think I've seen, since I've been on the council, I really haven't seen the state police miss much. And in addition to that, we as governor's counselors, we have our own questionnaire. So when somebody applies, there's something called the Judicial Nominating Commission application. It has two parts. The first part is a lot of biological information. Where do you work? Professional history, educational history. What does your spouse do? Where do you live? Stuff like that. The second part is more about cases that the attorney or the judge has had, if it's a judge before us, to go up to the higher court. And so the first part is not shown to the JNC, the Judicial Nominating Commission. So I'm kind of getting into the process. So you apply, Al. You send in your application to what we call the JNC. They review it. If they decide that they want to have you in for an interview, that would be based on the second part of your application. They do a blind review, so they don't look at your name and all your background. They look at your cases, your experience, what your values are, what you think's important in judges, qualities, and that kind of thing. They'll have you in. If they like you in the interview, then they'd vote on it, and then they would perform what's called due diligence on you. So then they do another soft background with
So
the
they do
lawyers
their
in the
own due
area.
diligence.
Correct. And then after that, if that comes back satisfactory, they'll vote. They'll vote to send you along. Then you would meet with the governor's chief legal counsel. If that goes well, then they would recommend you to what's called the joint bar. And that consists of, and let me just step back, the JNC, the commission, they're all Governor Baker's appointment, whoever the governor is. The joint bar is a group of county bar associations who elect a president, not elected by the people, by the lawyers, not appointed by the governor, and they meet. And then they vote on whether they think somebody's qualified or not. But their reasons for qualified or not qualified are never disclosed. You never get that. And it's another whole story that we could improve that part of the process.
But that's like HR at any commercial company. Mm-hmm. The resumes come in, and HR never really tells you why they rejected, or they have their own criteria. Mm-hmm. You only see what comes through. But
that's a private company. Don't forget, the taxpayers pay for the judges. So my criticism of the joint bar is I think that you have some talented people on the joint bar, but they should have a recommendation post-nomination. So let's say the person meets with chief legal counsel, they like that nominee, then the nominee meets with the governor says, I want to nominate, the governor nominates, then the joint bar should weigh in with their opinion. And they've kind of evolved into this entity.
Sounds like it's
backwards.
Yes.
Because they've evolved into this entity that they have this veto power now over the process, and they're not elected by the people, they're not appointed by a duly elected governor. So it could be improved. And what I'd like to see happen is that they are more like the American Bar Association, who weigh in after a nomination. They say, we believe this person's qualified, highly qualified, or not qualified.
So they'd be advisors to your council.
And we take all the information just like we would any witness testimony or anything else. And then if they get through the joint bar, or if they don't, some governors have nominated even without the recommendation of the joint bar. Jane Swift started doing that when the joint bar started playing games with her nominee. Then they would come before the council. So it is a long process, usually takes months.
But again, it's so, You're not hiring the McDonald's manager on the corner here.
No.
That you can get rid of, and okay, that guy didn't work out, let's hire somebody else next month. You're talking about
Lifetime.
15 years, 20 years before you get a chance.
And the only way to remove a judge is through the impeachment process. And a judge has not been impeached in
was gonna
Massachusetts since the Civil War era.
When was the last time? Right.
Right. And I have a real problem with that. And it's something that I have been working on and talking about. I met Officer Gannon's parents, who was, he was tragically shot and murdered by a person with a 4 or 5 page rap sheet who was let walk out of court. And, that never should have happened. And, that judge made a mistake, a big mistake. The judge in Essex County didn't incarcerate a man who was on the streets selling heroin, convicted of possession and intent to distribute heroin. And the judge said, I'm not going to incarcerate him because it was just a money crime and I don't want him to be deported. And, so in other words, heroin is killing kids every day. We have a major drug problem in this Commonwealth. He's not going to incarcerate him because it's a money crime, and he's not going to incarcerate him because of his immigration status. And he said these things from the bench, and I think that's outrageous. So I went to work, and I've been talking about this since I first ran. See, we live in a state where we don't have any judicial accountability. So Massachusetts is on this side of the spectrum. And then other states you have elected judges. I don't think that's the way to go.
That worries me.
And me too.
That worries me because now it's popularity contest.
Yeah, and they're beholden. So that bothers me. But where is the happy medium?
Can we have something in the middle that says, okay, Jen, your group gives me 5 years. At the end of 5 years, I got to come back and say, I did good. Can I have 15?
Right, lifetime tenure. So here's the thing. So a guy like the fellow in Essex County, the judge who made those statements from the bench, would be required to come in before the Governor's Council, and I've talked about this with Charlie Baker. I have 2 senators, bipartisan, which is refreshing, right, working on this with me, a Republican and a Democrat. And to have that type of judge, and if judges are doing a good job, then don't have them come in. But when you have those problems, have them come in, right? Have them come in and have them answer to the council about their decisions, why they did that, and have a public forum where the public can come and it's an open process. And it might sound simplified, but I think about, as a former selectman, how many you're in town government, you're on the finance committee, as a selectman you vote on a lot of liquor licenses, right? Entertainment licenses, liquor licenses. And if there are establishments that have 100% clean track records and they never have problems and they have tips trained bartenders and they do everything right every year, we don't have them come in. And we didn't have them come in every year to renew. You'd renew. But if you have an establishment where they're serving minors, there are fights, people are getting hurt, they're open past their hours, they got to come in and tell.
I'm comfortable with that concept to say everybody comes up after 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
You look and the Governor's Council looks through and says, okay, these 3 exemplary.
Mm-hmm.
Check.
Right. But when you have
these 2, let's figure out.
Let's have them in, and judges really, it's almost like a gag order. They can't talk to the press. So this is an opportunity for them to come in and say, this is why I did what I did, this is why I said what I said. And it's an open process and the public is there. And families like Officer Gannon's family, Officer Tarantino's family have an opportunity to be there, to ask questions. And I really just think that holding judges accountable is something we need to work on in this Commonwealth, and we don't have any accountability. Now, it ultimately would take a constitutional amendment, but I just think it's better government versus what we do now. What we do now, there are confidential surveys that are completed, they're sent out to certain lawyers, how a judge acts, how are they respectful, do they get the decisions out, XYZ. And those are sent into the Massachusetts Supreme Court, and they're confidential. Nobody sees them. So if you have a judge who's rude and disrespectful, arrogant, tardy, doesn't get their decisions out, that would be reported but sent to the Supreme Court, and maybe the judge gets sent to sensitivity training. Yeah, or they get punished and they have to go to a court that's far away from their home for 6 months or something. That's not accountability. You don't change behaviors that way, and I don't think it's fair to the taxpayers.
No, and realistically, as just a voter, you pick up the paper and you read about things like drunk drivers. It's scary when I think the Globe years ago ran statistics that said 80%.
They did.
under certain judges automatically get off. It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
You know, because, I mean, I could see having some compassion that one time in your life you drank a little too much, you were barely over the limit, you didn't cause any problem, and you're told, okay, here's your mulligan, don't do it again. Okay.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to ruin anybody's life over one little mistake. But when you see people and you hear it's their fifth, their sixth, or they've hurt people, I don't understand. I'd love to have a judge say, you know, explain to me, Lucy, why this makes any sense.
Yeah, and with those cases, normally what you see when you get into third, fourth, fifth, sixth offense, judges, well, the smart judges,
Would they even touch him?
they won't touch them. They will say you need to get a jury trial to defense counsel, because they're gonna, you know, they won't touch them. And most lawyers know that they have to get a jury trial because the judge is gonna hook their client. I mean, if the facts, you know, if the evidence comes in on an offense like that, so most of those cases you see go to jury trials, what the judge sentences, okay? So if somebody's hooked on a sixth, they're going to jail. It's mandatory under the statute. So, you know, those cases are ones that perhaps the judge is too lenient in a sentence. You know, if it's a second or a third, there's a little more discretion. If it's a second, they can handle it as a first offense if there's a conviction, if the person has no prior record. So those are the cases where you see, you know, how does this happen? And somebody gets out and kills somebody innocent, you know, those horrific news stories.
Had in Milford too many times. You know, the drunk driver took away a wonderful boy who was going to help the needy at Christmas. Some drunk driver driving down the wrong side, and it wasn't the first time.
Right, yeah, those are those.
I don't know how you look at the parents if I was a judge and say, well, it made sense to me. You know? Now, I'm worried when I see television, the Senate hearings. I'm not the brightest bulb on the tree, but I'm not the dullest either. And candidly, I can't stand both sides. You know, when I heard, no matter who you nominate, I'm going to vote against.
I think that was said right after the nomination.
But-
well, you know what I heard even better than that? I guess there were people outside where the announcement was being made. It was kind of like the AFC championship, okay? The teams are playing, the shirts are pre-made, the hats are pre-made, and whoever wins, you throw their hat on. Whoever was nominated, they all had hats with different names on them because there are 3 or 4 names in circulation. So as soon as Kavanaugh's name came out, they like dug through their boxes and threw on their hat. All they could think of were, you know, playoffs. And
Yeah.
so I guess in the third world countries, there are a lot of kids running around
with
shirts on of the other people who are on the short list, huh?
But you know, it bothers me because I was always a fan of Kennedy because I couldn't figure him out. I don't want a justice who spouts dogma, you know, always votes to the right, always votes to the left. I loved Kennedy because I could never figure him out. He seemed to be more in the middle and dealing with issues.
Case by case.
Case by case.
Right.
I mean, do we have that? Do we suffer that in a state level? Is it that bad?
Sometimes I think there are members of the Mass Supreme Court who spout dogma, and I've had some interesting conversations with some members of the SJC who have gone up under the Baker administration, and I'm not going to obviously name
No,
names.
please.
But you know, I've had candid conversations where they say, we don't know how Justice so-and-so got to some of his conclusions. He goes from A to Z, and it doesn't make any sense in between, because he starts with an issue and he wants to get to a certain result, and he gets there, but it makes no sense in between how he got there. So it does happen. You know, as far as Kennedy, what's interesting is Kavanaugh clerked for Kennedy.
Yes.
And you know who else? I thought Justice Scalia was a brilliant jurist, and even his critics, you know, he would make decisions on First Amendment cases that, you know, if you're a conservative, you think, oh no, he'd be against that, flag burning, certain things. He always came down on the side of the First Amendment, and you know, he's very consistent with that, whether it fit somebody's political narrative or not. And I think very much, Justice Kennedy was like that as well, in that he was never predictable.
Right.
And I would say, that was refreshing about him, as every case is different.
I've always said I enjoy being in Massachusetts because I have a hard time discerning between a liberal mass Republican and a conservative mass Democrat. Somehow in the middle they all mush together.
Right.
And that makes me feel better.
Right.
Because when I get out to the left coast, boy, there's no doubt there. Or if I'm in the middle of the square states, God, do I feel, we joke on this show where we have the conservative view and they all look at me and say, oh, you're too liberal, because you won't say, when you hear the word gay, I say, who cares?
Yeah.
No, you're supposed to say bad. Or, it's like, no, I don't care.
Right.
It's same thing, nobody will accept me on the blue side because they say I'm too physically conservative, and I am. I'm really proud of the fact that Milford's had 13 years of a surplus.
That's amazing.
And that we don't use profanity, those words of 2.5 override and debt exclusion. It makes me feel good. But too many times I worry when people stop debating the issue. Our legislator, Brian Murray, is a Democrat. Our state senator, Ryan Fatman's a Republican. I like the fact that the two of them get together, work together for issues that will benefit Milford.
Well, all politics are local, right? Tip O'Neill
Good old Tip
said that.
O'Neill.
And sometimes when I go around the district, I have a lot of Democratic friends. I wouldn't be sitting in the governor's council seat unless Democrats supported me. I'm the only Republican on the governor's council right now. I have 7 Democratic colleagues, and I work fine with them. And some people say to me, Jen, I never even thought to ask you what your party was, because I pride myself on vetting nominees. I don't vet Democratic nominees. I don't vet Republican nominees. I vet nominees. And there have been folks who've come in front of us who have said things like, Barney Frank was great. And, personally, I don't think Barney Frank was great. But when I look at the nominee's qualifications, he's done murder trials, rape trials, med malpractice trials, and, incredible litigation experience, very versed in the law, nice demeanor. I vote for the person. I'm not, there's no place for that. And I think that's what really, with all the stuff going on with Justice Kavanaugh right now, I think that's what, it almost saddens me that we have reached a point in this country where what we're seeing unfolding in Washington is such a black mark on I think it's a black mark on the United States Supreme Court. And just when you thought congressional approval
couldn't
rating
go lower,
couldn't go any lower, and I say people, because I've been asked that question, what do you think of the Justice Kavanaugh hearings? And I say, look, I'm going to speak for myself. I've never been a gotcha person in politics or any of my duties as an elected official. It does injustice to the people I serve. And the fact that somebody would sit on a letter about an alleged sexual assault for months and let a judicial hearing wrap up, denied due process to the alleged victim, denied due process to Justice Kavanaugh, and denied due process to the people of the United States of America. And it really, really disappoints me that you have elected, people who have been elected in office for years, Senator Dianne Feinstein, who would pull something like that. And I think, Al, that's why a lot of folks are just disengaged from politics. You can't talk politics at family parties anymore. People don't want to talk about it. Friends don't want to talk about politics. I find it fascinating. But I can have a conversation with somebody who is, very far to the left, very far to the right, and everybody in between, and just have a nice civil conversation about what's...
Neither one will accept me, so I live in the world of purple.
Yeah, you're in political purgatory.
Yeah, I'm in purple. I'm a combination of red and blue, right? Because I won't go automatically either side.
I won't.
And I always long for the days of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, where you can be 180 degrees out of political phase, but when the cameras are off, respect each other.
I remember a story Scott Brown told when he was a Senator Brown. He said, he looks at the political climate today, and it's been bad for a number of years. It didn't just start with Trump. It's been bad, and race relations and all that. But when Reagan got shot, he was in the hospital, and Tip O'Neill went to visit him, and Tip O'Neill was at his bedside, and he said, come on, Mr. President, I want you to live. I love you. Can you imagine today? Can you imagine
Nancy
today?
Pelosi?
Or Chuck Schumer? I mean, Trump would need a food tester if they entered his hospital room.
I was going to say,
I mean,
don't let him hold the pillow.
And it's terrible, though. It's not healthy. And this is what we're teaching young kids, to get in people's faces in restaurants and scream at them. And I mean, Justice Kavanaugh's wife has been threatened through emails. His kids have been mocked, and it's just, I mean, I don't even know where to go with it anymore. It's so disappointing to see elected officials conduct themselves in this way. And I want to tell your audience that I don't conduct myself that way when I'm in Boston representing the folks of the 7th District. I'm professional, I'm courteous, and even when I say no, I do it in a way that is not disrespectful to the nominee or their families. It's not, why embarrass anybody?
Well, the other thing you're bringing up is families. Families have to be off limits. Some 8-year-old you're going to mock or attack over what their mom or their dad is doing.
Or did in high school?
Or did in high school. I mean, I'd be scared to death. The one thing that resonated hard with me was when President Trump said, I'm worried that people are going to tell me forget it. I don't want to go through this.
It absolutely has a chilling effect on people who would think about brilliant minds that the country will never have the benefit of on all sides of the political spectrum. This is an all-time low. I mean, the Clarence Thomas hearings argue whether they were a little different, not different. Two adults, there were witnesses, who corroborated parts of her story. This is just, I mean, if the new standard is to hold people accountable for what they did at age 17, whether it happened, I think something may have happened to this woman, but I don't know if it was Justice Kavanaugh.
But Jen, I don't have any doubt that she seems earnest, she seems honest, but I'm not quite sure who it was, when it was, where it was. Wait a minute, when did we start saying the U.S. Constitution guarantees you're guilty until proven innocent?
Well, that's what's happened, and I think that was the intent. And when you have, see, this is what bothers me, when you have, and now there are these new allegations, a group of people who come out and say, we are voting against this man no matter what. Whether Jesus Christ rose from the, grave and said he's right, the Savior, we're voting against him no matter what, before they'd seen a lick of evidence or reviewed his materials, heard the man speak at his confirmation hearing. I mean, once you're not an honest critic in public office anymore, you need to go.
The First Amendment guarantees
Vote against
your right
him on
to
the merits.
Guarantees your right to be stupid in my mind, and it guarantees my right to be stupid in your mind, but respect me. And when you sit there and say, I am not living up to my responsibility, I've already made up my mind. Don't confuse me with facts when I'm trying to have an informed opinion.
Right.
I said, wait a minute, no wonder, what is it, 5 is the rating for Congress?
I thought it was 8, but it could be.
Maybe it's 8, okay.
It could be 5 now after this week.
And I listened to this, my God, it's scary. I mean, I would hate to think, your life has to be the number 5. My life is 8. On the Finance Committee, there's 15 of us. So if I want to get an idea through, I got to have 8 total, so 7 plus me. You've got to have 5 if you want to get somebody nominated.
As the only Republican.
Yeah, that always amazed me, because I remember going up to Beacon Hill, and they got all the names. And I said, who are these people? They must be on, bad people. They put it, oh no, those are the Republicans. We have 6.
Yes, yes.
6?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I thought about it, I could probably name the number of Republican senators. But for me, when I walk in that chamber and I do my job, it never enters my mind. And I get along fine with my colleagues, and we're collegial and respectful.
But again, when I bring up what I see Ryan Fatman and Brian Murray doing, to me, they're doing their dang job. I mean, one's a very Republican, and one's a very Democratic. I mean, they're red and blue. There's no question.
Right.
But when it comes down to helping the people in Milford, I see them come together.
They do. They've worked on a lot of bipartisan stuff. And
Could I ask for anything more than that?
No, that's how it's supposed to work. you're on the Finance Committee, I was on the Board of Selectmen, and this is where I think I really cut my teeth as an elected officer, because public servant, I got elected at age 23. And we'd have, real arguments, battles, if you will, over certain issues, 5-member board. And when we were done, it would be like, okay, let's go across to the local business owner's establishment and have a beer and laugh about it. Or, we'd have a cookout and we'd all go to the same cookout and respectful, and, all our, the families, kids played sports together, and that's how it's supposed to be. And I don't know what it's going to take in this country, in this state, to get back to that. But that's where we need to be. That's America at its best, not the way, it's so toxic right now.
I remember when we had the cable committee here, and I suggested a good friend, Bob Littleton, to be put on the cable committee. And a couple members said, "Are you kidding? He is so far to the left." I said, "That's why I want him." Bobby looked at things in ways I would never, I could try my whole life. Mm-hmm. And we came at issues from so different perspective.
Right.
I would never even think the way he did. But somewhere in between was probably the right answer. And we coached together for almost a decade. Totally different personalities. Mm-hmm. But I really respected him as a person. Right. So when he took a strong stand on something, it's got to be a reason. And candidly, it made me better. Because I thought about things in what I considered bizarre ways sometimes, but different ways. And I grew bigger and better. So, it disappoints.
It's not that you sell, and we all stand by our real core principles and values. And as I said at the beginning of the show, I'm the only one up there talking about public safety. And then I have very, very liberal colleagues, I'll say, who don't want to put anybody in jail for anything, even if they're committing crimes to feed drug habits, and incarceration would save, because they're a menace to the public, would save their lives because they're going to overdose. I'm all, you got to put bad people or people who are reckless like that in jail. That's my position, and I'm not shy about it at all. So we have different values and perspectives, and that's okay. We'll go through our line of questioning, and maybe I'll go back to what one of my colleagues said and ask a nominee if I think they were just telling that counselor what they wanted to hear, and if I'm disturbed, I'll say no. I was telling you that prior to me getting on the council, there hadn't been a single nominee defeated in 5 years. Right. Since I've been on the council, and I'm not just saying it's because of Jen Casey, but I would say I'm proud of the fact that I've participated in turning up the volume of accountability on the Governor's Council to ensure the people of the Commonwealth are getting the best judges that they can get. And since I've been on the council, we've had 11 nominees defeated, countless withdrawn when they knew that they didn't have the votes under the Patrick administration and the Baker administration. And we've probably had 15 ties, which you didn't even have a tie in 5 years prior to 2011. So I think that the people are being served. At least I'm proud of the accountability since I've been on the council.
What's the biggest challenge the Governor's Council faces?
Well, there's a lot of public scrutiny, media scrutiny. The Boston Herald likes to take shots at us. The Boston Globe likes to take shots at us. And what was interesting, when I ran in 2010, one of the biggest criticisms in the Herald and the Globe was that the council was a rubber stamp. And that was a big platform issue for me. In other words, if you were nominated, everybody just went
15
through.
ties?
No, prior to me getting
on. I was going to say,
when I was campaigning. Yes, when I was campaigning, it was criticized as being a rubber stamp, and it was. Nobody defeated, no ties in 5 years. Are you kidding me? So then I got on, and then the criticism changed because they couldn't call it a rubber stamp anymore. And again, I'm not just saying it's all what I did, but it couldn't call it a rubber stamp anymore. Then it was, we're holding everything up. We're a bunch of clowns because we're not just rubber stamping anymore. So the biggest, one of the biggest challenges is to get the media to get it right. Shocker, right? The media doesn't get it right all the time. But at least be honest critics. Like, okay, yeah, they're vetting nominees. They had a 3-day hearing for the Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Supreme Court. They can't say anything positive about the council. So challenging, maybe the better word is frustrating. You know, the challenge, I think, is every time you get a nominee, it's like the most important case of my life. I mean, you read the materials, you study the materials, you make the phone calls, you do due diligence, you do the, you know, call the lawyers who were involved in cases. How was the nominee? How did they act? What do you think about their professionalism, their experience, people who have dealt with them hands-on? Because I might get a nominee from the Cape who I don't know from Adam or Eve. So I really have to dig into the materials that we have. So it's a challenge to go to work every Wednesday and do the job you're elected to do. If you know.
Well, I mean, especially you're putting people in a decision-making process that could directly affect you and your family. They could put the people that are driving under the influence, or, I mean, I'm sorry, guys selling heroin to kids. I have no sympathy.
I don't either.
I have no sympathy, you know, and there's certain things that I just can't. You hurt my kids. I have 4,200 kids in Milford that we have to worry about every day. Mm-hmm. Kids in our schools. Somebody who would hurt our kids, whatever liberalism I still have in me goes away.
Well, you know, kids cross the line, and that's another area. We talk about mandatory minimum sentences. A lot of my colleagues ask whether nominees support them. And I think what gets lost in that conversation when you talk about criminal justice reform, yes, maybe some crimes you should look at, and maybe there shouldn't be mandatory minimums. But to just say we shouldn't have mandatory minimums, I think is wrong. When you get into situations where rape of children, serious, serious crimes against kids, which I've prosecuted, I've put people in jail for raping kids. Those are cases I'm real proud of with experts in DNA and that kind of stuff. I am absolutely in favor of mandatory minimums when you talk about hurting kids and raping kids and committing acts like that. So I make no secret about that. Some of my colleagues are not. And, you know, to your point about life and the kids, and, you know, you get 4,200 kids in this community, which is a great community. When you think about lifetime appointed judges, when I try to explain what it is to folks, you think about it. Who can take away your home, your child, and your freedom with a single decision? Not the President of the United States, not the governor of your state, but a lifetime appointed judge can.
So Jen, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Well, Al, I think we've been talking now for probably 57 and a half seconds, 57 minutes and 30 seconds. And I've laid out my experience and 20 years criminal civil law. I love what I do. I work incredibly hard for the people I represent on the Governor's Council. And I take to heart, every time I vote on a lifetime appointment, how important this decision is on the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. As I just said, judge can take away your home, your kids, and your freedom with a single decision. As somebody who practices in every court where that happens, I take this stuff to heart.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
As always, to our 6 loyal viewers, I've always said I'll never ask you to vote for any specific candidate, not my place. But I'll beg you, get out and vote. And if you're going to go vote, then understand who you're voting for. Learn the candidates, what they stand for. Pick the one that you feel best represents the values of your family and will best take care of all of us here at the center of the universe. So to our 6 loyal viewers, good night. May God bless, and may tomorrow be a better night than tonight. Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.
Not too long since I've been home.